In the next 3 seconds, you're about to hear a secret recorded conversation between Ilhan Omar and a foreign operative. But before that, you think you've seen political takedowns before. You haven't seen anything yet. Senator John Kennedy, with his razor-sharp wit and unyielding commitment to truth, steps into the spotlight. What happens in the next hour will change American politics forever. This isn't just another hearing. This is the complete ethical annihilation of a politician who thought she was untouchable. What you're about to hear contains evidence so shocking, so integrity-shattering, that it will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people in Congress. Listener discretion is advised. This is the story of how one Louisiana senator, with a briefcase full of evidence, brought down a controversial politician. This is the story of ethical justice. Let's go. The Senate Ethics Committee hearing room buzzed with electric anticipation as C-SPAN cameras rolled live to millions of Americans hungry for accountability. What they were about to witness would become the most watched congressional hearing in history, surpassing even Watergate in viewership and ethical weight. Kennedy entered the chamber with the confidence of a principled leader who had spent years preparing for this moment. His weathered leather briefcase contained evidence to expose deep-seated deception, but his simple suit wire-rimmed glasses and distinctive Louisiana bearing contrasted with the explosive nature of what he was about to unleash. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chairman Chuck Grassley announced as the room fell silent. "We're here for an emergency oversight hearing on potential ethical violations and abuse of office by members of Congress. Today, the American people get the accountability they've demanded." Kennedy settled into his chair with the calm of a senator who had walked into his opponent's political funeral, placing his briefcase on the table as phones live-streamed to millions of eager Americans. His preparation was meticulous, his evidence devastating, and his commitment to ethical principles unshakable. Meanwhile, Representative Ilhan Omar entered through the rear doors flanked by a phalanx of expensive attorneys, their grim expressions betraying their worry. Her forced confidence couldn't hide the unease in her eyes or the slight tremor in her hands as she faced the scope of Kennedy's preparation. The progressive firebrand, known for bold statements and radical positions, was about to confront a senator renowned for his sharp wit, folksy wisdom, and unyielding pursuit of truth. How fitting that Representative Omar chose to attend today, Grassley noted with quiet satisfaction. "Senator Kennedy, please proceed with your presentation of evidence." Kennedy's eyes met Omar's across the chamber. In that moment, she realized this was no ordinary session, but a confrontation with a Louisiana senator armed with undeniable facts, determined to leave no doubts unresolved. Mr. Chairman Kennedy began, his voice blending Southern charm with prosecutorial steel that had made him a respected voice in Washington. "What I'm about to present shows a systematic violation of ethical standards, immigration law, and public trust in American congressional history. We're talking about misrepresentations and inconsistencies that would trouble any honest American." The stage was set. Kennedy, the straight-talking senator with compelling evidence, versus Omar, whose career was about to be exposed as built on questionable foundations. The ethical reckoning had begun. For years, Kennedy's office had conducted one of the most thorough investigations into congressional integrity in the nation's history. The evidence was so meticulously documented that even Omar's staunchest supporters would be forced to reconsider. He had built an airtight case to challenge her narrative and highlight the importance of transparency in public service. The folders were ready, the witnesses prepared, and the American people were watching, eager to see faith in accountable government restored. No one, absolutely no one, is above ethical standards in America. Kennedy opened his first folder with deliberate precision, the rustling papers echoing through the silent chamber like the opening notes of an ethical symphony. The folder, thick with official government seals, pulsed with ominous significance. Representative Omar, he began his Louisiana drawl, carrying across the room like honey over broken glass. Back home in Louisiana, we say if you're going to tell a story, your facts better be straight. Today we'll see if your immigration story holds up to ethical scrutiny. Omar straightened in her chair, flanked by her attorneys, like bodyguards protecting a figure under siege. "Senator Kennedy," she replied with forced confidence, her voice tinged with progressive righteousness. "I welcome any questions about my immigration journey. I've always been transparent about my story as a refugee who found safety and opportunity in America." "Well, that's mighty interesting," Kennedy said, his eyes twinkling with the anticipation of a principled investigator who'd felt a tug on his factual line. "Because I got some documents here that might shed new light on that transparency." Omar prepared her well-rehearsed narrative, the familiar tale of fleeing Somalia, enduring refugee camps, and finding sanctuary in America. She thought this was safe territory, a story her allies had never challenged, expecting Kennedy to follow the same respectful script. "Senator Kennedy, my family fled Somalia's civil war when I was young. We spent years in a Kenyan refugee camp before being resettled legally in the United States. It's a story of American generosity and opportunity for those who come here lawfully." She gestured broadly, warming to her theme like a professor addressing slow students. "This is what makes America great, our ability to welcome those fleeing persecution and give them a chance to contribute. My family's journey embodies American values." The audience nodded, and immigration advocates in the gallery exchanged knowing glances. This was the Ilhan Omar they expected, confident, articulate, in control of her narrative, hitting her talking points with precision. But Kennedy sat quietly scribbling notes on a legal pad, his patient Louisiana smile unwavering. He wasn't swayed by the performance, and that made it less convincing to everyone watching. "Well, Representative Omar, I appreciate that story," Kennedy said, reaching into his briefcase with theatrical slowness. "But I'm a straight shooter, and straight shooters like documents. These here are from the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, and the Immigration Service, real official records, not campaign talking points." Omar's smile faltered as Kennedy arranged the papers with a senator's precision. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Senator. My immigration records are public. Are they now?" Kennedy asked, his charm sharpening. "These documents show some mighty curious discrepancies." He held up a refugee application from the mid-1990s, displayed on the chamber's monitors, pointing to dates with a laser pointer. "Your family claimed to flee Somalia 1 year, but your autobiography and interviews say another. That's a significant gap, Representative Omar." Her attorneys whispered frantically, but Kennedy pressed on. "But that ain't the interesting part. The interesting part is what happened in those missing years." He produced a document with Kenyan government seals. "Representative Omar, where were you on a certain day in 2009? Omar paled, but held her composure. "Senator, I'd have to check my records. That's a specific date from long ago." "Let me refresh your memory," Kennedy said with devastating gentleness. "That day in 2009 is mighty important to your immigration story. The monitors showed a Kenyan marriage certificate from 2009 listing Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Nur Said Elmi, clear and official with government stamps." The chamber fell silent. "This shows you married Ahmed Elmi," Kennedy explained. Omar tried to interrupt, but he raised a hand. "This gets real interesting ethically." He produced another document, an immigration petition for a spouse. "But this certificate says you were already married elsewhere. That's bigamy, Representative Omar. The senator's voice grew pointed. In fact, cultural traditions show an earlier religious marriage, but legally you married Elmi in 2009. Omar's reaction was visceral, her attorneys scrambling. Kennedy gestured to the rear doors. This is complicated, so I brought someone to explain. A distinguished elderly man in a conservative suit entered under escort, his bearing marking him as a career immigration official. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Mr. James Patterson, former director of Refugee Services who processed your family's case. Omar's horror was complete. Patterson, supposedly retired in peace, was an unexpected witness. How had Kennedy found him? How had he persuaded a career civil servant to break protocol? Patterson adjusted the microphone with trembling hands, but spoke with steady authority, carrying 30 years of experience. On behalf of the American people, I must correct the record on the Omar family immigration case. His testimony was devastating. False family relationships, incorrect persecution claims, mismatched timelines. The application was expedited under pressure, despite irregularities. Kennedy leaned forward. Mr. Patterson, did the Omar family qualify for refugee status? Absolutely not, Patterson replied firmly. Standard procedures would have denied them. Kennedy displayed a timeline chart comparing Omar's contradictory claims to official records. You've told different versions, different ages, family members, persecutions. Documents don't lie. Omar's defense was weak. These are minor discrepancies. My family found safety. Minor Kennedy's voice rose with ethical indignation. Misrepresenting to the government is a serious federal offense with severe penalties including deportation. While you took a spot, genuine refugees were denied. He pulled out DNA results. Now about your marriage to Ahmed Elmi. You called him a friend, but DNA says he's your brother. The room gasped. You married your brother to skirt immigration law, an offense to American law and decency. Omar clutched the table, hyperventilating. This is character assassination. The DNA is fabricated. DNA doesn't care about your background, Kennedy replied calmly. It cares about truth. Your career's built on misrepresentations. The first round ended. Kennedy had dismantled Omar's narrative with documents, testimony, and science. His glance at a second folder marked with Federal Election Commission seals hinted at worse to come. Round one's done, Representative Omar, he said with Louisiana charm, but we got more ethical dancing to do. The recess felt eternal for Omar, hunched in a side room as her attorneys whispered urgently about damage control. Kennedy's evidence was too precise, too devastating. He hadn't stumbled upon it. He'd built an ethical case with prosecutorial precision. As the hearing reconvened, Kennedy sat calmly, his next folder pulsing with significance, ready to unravel more threads of deception in a masterclass of accountability. The 15-minute recess felt like an eternity for Ilhan Omar. She sat hunched in a side room, her expensive attorneys huddled around her like doctors attending to a terminal patient. The confidence that had carried her through years of activism was evaporating like morning dew under the Louisiana sun. Representative Omar, her lead attorney, whispered urgently, "We need to consider damage control options. Kennedy clearly has access to records we didn't know existed." "Absolutely not!" Omar hissed, though her voice lacked its usual fire. "This is political theater designed to silence a progressive voice. I can handle some Louisiana senator with ethical fantasies, but deep down, Omar knew something had fundamentally shifted. The immigration documents, the witness testimony, the DNA evidence, it was all too precise, too devastating. Kennedy hadn't just stumbled onto this information. He'd been building an ethical case with the precision of a straight shooter who always hits his mark. When the hearing reconvened, Kennedy sat calmly at his table, a new folder placed prominently in front of him. This one was thicker than the first, bound with Federal Election Commission seals that seemed to pulse with financial significance. Senator Kennedy Chairman Grassley announced, "You may continue with your ethical presentation." Kennedy stood slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory, like a senator who had found the perfect test case for accountability. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Representative Omar," he said, turning to face her directly, "let's talk about how you've been spending the American people's money." Omar straightened in her chair, attempting to project confidence she no longer felt. "Senator Kennedy, I've always complied with all FEC regulations and campaign finance laws. My financial disclosures are public record." Kennedy's smile was gentle, almost grandfatherly. "Well, Representative Omar, that's mighty interesting because I got some records here that suggest your definition of compliance might differ from what ethical standards require." He opened the folder with deliberate ceremony, revealing stacks of bank records, FEC filings, and financial documents. "You see, when you're spending donor money and taxpayer resources, transparency ain't optional. It's ethical." Kennedy pulled out his first document, a simple calculator appearing in his other hand. "Representative Omar, your congressional salary is $174,000 per year. Your husband's consulting firm has received approximately $2.8 million from your campaign and associated PACs over the past few years. That's more than 16 times your annual salary going to your family business." The numbers were displayed on the chamber's monitors, each transaction detailed with dates, amounts, and purposes. "Now, I ain't a mathematician, but that seems like a mighty convenient way to turn campaign contributions into family income." Omar's defense was immediate and rehearsed. "Senator Kennedy, my husband's firm provides legitimate consulting services, travel coordination, fundraising assistance, and strategic communications are all necessary for any competitive congressional campaign." "Is that so?" Kennedy asked, his Louisiana drawl carrying new weight. "Well, that's real interesting because I got some travel records here that might shed a new light on what kind of consulting your husband was providing." Kennedy produced a thick stack of travel receipts and expense reports, each bearing official stamps and signatures. "Representative Omar, between certain periods, your campaign paid your husband's firm $230,000 for travel consulting services." But these receipts show something real curious. The documents were displayed side by side on the monitors. Campaign expense reports on the left showed payments for official campaign travel, but the actual receipts on the right told a different story entirely. These here receipts show luxury resorts in Bermuda, first-class flights to Paris, 5-star hotels in Rome. Kennedy read with devastating precision. "Now, I might be a simple Louisiana senator, but I'm having trouble understanding how a vacation in Bermuda constitutes campaign travel for a Minnesota congresswoman." Omar's panic was becoming visible. Her hands shook as she shuffled through her prepared responses. "Those were legitimate campaign strategy sessions. We needed private settings to discuss sensitive political matters." Kennedy's eyebrows raised with theatrical skepticism. "Strategy sessions in Bermuda for a Minnesota congressional race." He pulled out another document. "That's funny, because this hotel receipt from the Fairmont Southampton shows you checked in as Mr. and Mrs. for a 7-day stay. The same husband whose consulting firm received $230,000 from your campaign. The same husband who was married to another woman at the time." The implications hung in the air like an ethical thundercloud. Kennedy wasn't finished. He gestured to his staff, who wheeled in a sophisticated timeline display showing the overlap between Omar's personal relationship and her campaign payments. "Representative Omar, Let's talk about timing. Kennedy said, moving to stand beside the timeline. This chart shows something real interesting about when your husband's payments started and when your personal relationship began. The timeline was devastating. It showed Omar's previous marriage ending her first payments to the firm beginning shortly after, and their romantic relationship becoming public later. According to this timeline, Kennedy explained you started paying your current husband's consulting firm months before you finalized your divorce from your previous husband. You were literally using campaign money to fund your affair. Omar tried to interrupt, but Kennedy held up his hand. But that ain't the interesting part. The interesting part is what your husband was doing with that money while he was still married to his first wife. Kennedy displayed divorce court documents from the husband's first marriage. These here are court filings from his ex-wife's divorce proceedings. According to her attorney, he left his wife and children to pursue a romantic relationship with his client, Ilhan Omar, funded by campaign contributions. The personal details were devastating. The ex-wife's sworn testimony described finding receipts for romantic getaways charged to Omar's campaign, discovering love letters, and learning that their marriage ended because he was in love with a congresswoman who was paying him millions. Kennedy reached for a secure recording device at his table. Now, Representative Omar, you've claimed all these payments were for legitimate consulting services, but I got something here that might clarify what services your husband was really providing. The large monitors flickered to life, displaying a split screen. On the left was a bank transaction record showing a $50,000 transfer from Omar's campaign to the consulting firm. On the right was a timestamp showing the exact same moment. This here's a bank record from a specific date, Kennedy explained. It shows a $50,000 payment to your husband's firm at 2:47 p.m. Now watch what happens 37 minutes later. The right side showed hotel booking confirmations for a luxury resort in Miami paid for with a credit card linked to the firm. Your campaign paid for consulting at 2:47 p.m., Kennedy observed with prosecutorial precision. Your husband booked a romantic weekend getaway at 3:24 p.m. the same day. That ain't consulting, Representative Omar. That's personal enrichment with extra steps. The hearing room erupted as Omar's remaining composure finally cracked. This is a violation of privacy. How did you get private bank records? When you use campaign money for personal expenses, them bank records become evidence of ethical breaches, Kennedy replied calmly. Kennedy opened his final folder for this round marked with official Federal Election Commission seals and criminal referral stamps. Representative Omar Kennedy said, his voice taking on the tone of a senator delivering a lesson in accountability. Let me explain what you've done in terms the American people can understand. He began writing on a whiteboard set up for the hearing. Campaign finance violations, personal use of campaign funds, filing false FEC reports, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Each charge was written clearly, with corresponding statute numbers and penalty ranges. That's 6 federal felonies, Representative Omar, each carrying penalties ranging from 5 to 20 years in federal prison. Kennedy turned to face her directly. But here's what really bothers me about your financial misdeeds. While you were using campaign money to fund your romantic getaways, there were legitimate candidates across America who couldn't afford to run for office because they were actually following the rules. His voice rose with ethical indignation. You stole from your own supporters. People sent you $5 and $10 donations thinking they were supporting causes, and you spent their money on luxury vacations with your paramour. Omar's response was desperate and incoherent. These allegations are baseless. My campaign has always followed FEC guidelines. This is a partisan witch hunt designed to silence strong voices. Kennedy's response was swift and devastating. Representative Omar, the FEC doesn't care about your politics. It cares about the law. And according to the law, you've committed enough violations to spend the next century explaining yourself in federal court. Kennedy produced one final document for this round bearing Treasury Department seals and offshore banking marks. But there's one more thing Representative Omar Kennedy said, his tone becoming more serious. All these campaign violations, they're just the tip of the ethical iceberg. The monitors displayed complex financial flowcharts showing money moving through various accounts and shell companies. Your family has established a network of trusts and offshore accounts that have received over $3.2 million in questionable payments over the past years. Kennedy explained money from sources that ought to concern every patriotic American. The financial web was staggering. Payments from foreign organizations, transfers through Caribbean banking havens, and ultimately deposits into accounts controlled by Omar's immediate family. Representative Omar Kennedy said with devastating finality, "You haven't just violated campaign finance law. You've turned your congressional office into a personal ATM machine funded by sources that view America as their adversary." The second round was over. Kennedy had systematically exposed Omar's financial corruption with bank records, FEC violations, and evidence of a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond simple campaign finance abuse. But as he reached for his third folder marked with intelligence community seals and foreign agent registration documents, his expression suggested that the financial crimes were merely the foundation for something far more dangerous to American national security. "Round two's done, Representative Omar," he said with that terrifying Louisiana calm. "But now we need to talk about who's been paying you to undermine America and why they think you're worth the investment." As the chamber buzzed with shocked conversations and frantic note-taking, Omar sat motionless in her chair, realizing that her financial misdeeds had just been exposed as part of a much larger pattern of unethical activity. The senator from Louisiana was methodically building a case that would transform this hearing from a political scandal into something approaching a national security crisis. If Representative Omar thought the financial revelations were devastating, she was about to learn that John Neely Kennedy was just getting warmed up. The chamber buzzed with shocked conversations and frantic note-taking as Omar sat motionless, realizing her financial misdeeds were part of a larger pattern of unethical activity. The senator from Louisiana was methodically turning this hearing into a national security matter. If Representative Omar thought the financial revelations were devastating, she was about to learn that John Neely Kennedy was just getting warmed up. The straight-talking senator reached for his third folder, this one bearing intelligence community seals and foreign agent registration documents that seemed to pulse with national security significance. Representative Omar Kennedy began, his voice carrying new gravitas. "If you think unethical behavior is just about campaign money, you're about to learn who's been paying you to undermine America from within." Omar's remaining attorneys whispered damage control strategies, but she seemed unable to hear them. Her eyes fixed on Kennedy, with the intensity of someone watching her own political execution. Kennedy stood and moved to a presentation easel set up during the break. "Now, Representative Omar, let's talk about your pattern of statements regarding Jewish Americans and the State of Israel." He began displaying a timeline of Omar's most controversial quotes, each documented with date, location, and context. The pattern was undeniable and deeply disturbing. One statement: "It's all about the Benjamins," another allegiance to a foreign country. The timeline continued with quote after quote, each more inflammatory. "We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, the Taliban, and Israel." Kennedy turned to face Omar directly. Representative Omar, this isn't occasional poor word choice. This is a systematic pattern of rhetoric that raises serious ethical questions about your loyalties. Omar's defense was immediate but weak. Those statements have been taken out of context. I've always opposed hate in all forms. My criticism is of policies, not people. Is that so? Kennedy asked, producing another document. Because I got testimony here from community leaders that suggests otherwise. Kennedy gestured toward the gallery where several distinguished individuals had been seated. I'd like the American people to hear from those directly affected by your rhetoric. The first witness was Rabbi David Goldstein, a Holocaust survivor whose presence commanded respect. Despite his age, he walked to the witness table with dignity and moral authority. My name is Rabbi David Goldstein. I survived Auschwitz, came to America with nothing, and built communities in Minnesota, your district. His testimony hit hard. When you say Jews buy influence with money, I hear the lies that justified murdering my family. When you compare Israel to terrorists, you're telling my grandchildren their people are no better than those who want to exterminate them. The rabbi's voice cracked. I thought I escaped this hatred in America. I never expected it from a congresswoman representing my community. Kennedy's voice was respectful but firm. Rabbi Goldstein, do Representative Omar's statements constitute harmful rhetoric? Without question, the rabbi replied, this is the same rhetoric I heard in 1930s Germany lies and hatred in sophisticated language. Kennedy returned to his evidence table and produced a folder marked with Treasury and Foreign Agent Registration Act seals. Representative Omar, let's talk about your relationship with the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. Omar's confidence flickered back. CAIR is a civil rights organization fighting for Muslim Americans' rights. I'm proud of my association. Well, that's interesting, Kennedy replied, because I got financial records showing CAIR ain't exactly what it claims. The monitors displayed financial flowcharts money from foreign sources through intermediaries to CAIR, then to Omar's accounts. According to Treasury records, CAIR received over $12 million from sources in Qatar, Turkey, and others viewing America as a rival. Kennedy pointed to transactions. 3 days after your Benjamin's comment, CAIR transferred $50,000 to your legal fund. The timing was damning. You made controversial statements, faced criticism, then got money from an organization funded by foreign governments opposing Israel. That ain't civil rights. It's foreign influence peddling. Kennedy reached for his most sensitive folder marked with intelligence classifications. But CAIR is just the middleman. Let's talk about who's really funding your activities. Monitors showed satellite imagery of a Doha compound and financial records of transfers to U.S. organizations. This is the Qatar Foundation, a front for Qatari influence operations. Linked organizations funneled $2.3 million to groups paying your campaign and family accounts. Kennedy's voice sharpened. You've taken money from a government hosting Hamas funding terrorists, seeing U.S. support for Israel as an obstacle. Omar denied desperately. These are conspiracy theories. I've never received foreign money directly. You're right, Kennedy acknowledged. You used cutouts, but that don't make it ethical or legal. Kennedy activated a secure recording device. Representative Omar, my office intercepted a phone conversation between you and someone interesting. Omar's eyes widened. You can't intercept my communications, that's illegal. When coordinating with foreign agents on unsecured lines, it's evidence, Kennedy replied calmly. He pressed play, and Omar's voice filled the chamber. The Israel hearing went as planned. Kennedy is asking too many questions, but we can manage. A male voice with a Middle Eastern accent responded, "Sister Ilhan, your work is valuable. Additional funding will transfer through usual channels." Omar's voice, "Make sure it goes through KER first. No direct connections." The recording was damning, showing coordination with foreign handlers on payments and anti-Israel activities. Kennedy wasn't done. He produced an analysis of Omar's voting record against Middle Eastern governments' positions. In 47 votes on Israel and terrorism, your positions aligned perfectly with Qatar's. Every time Qatar wanted reduced U.S. support for Israel, you voted that way. Kennedy's voice rose. "You haven't represented Minnesota. You've represented Qatar's foreign ministry in Congress." Omar's response was incoherent. "This is biased conspiracy-mongering. You're attacking me for my faith and voice," Kennedy shot back. "This ain't about faith, it's about loyalty. Evidence shows yours belongs to foreign governments viewing America as an enemy." Kennedy gestured to witnesses. A former staffer, a young Muslim woman, testified, "I worked for Omar, believing in inclusion, but discovered her office coordinating with foreign organizations unrelated to American rights. Calls from foreign accents instructed votes." Another, a former CARE official, added, "Omar helped foreign governments recruit American Muslims for influence operations, turning communities into assets." Kennedy stood for his final presentation. "What we've documented isn't just questionable associations, it's systematic foreign influence, undermining U.S. policy. You've taken foreign money, coordinated with agents, voted per foreign instructions, used your office to recruit for foreign operations." Kennedy's voice crescendoed. "You violated your oath, committed acts, betraying the trust of the American people." The third round ended. Kennedy had exposed Omar's foreign influence with records recordings and testimony revealing an anti-American conspiracy. But as he reached for his fourth folder marked with Department of Defense seals, his expression hinted the foreign ties were preparation for something worse. "Round three's done, Representative Omar," he said with Louisiana. "Calm. Now we talk about what you've done with America's trusted access and information. We talk about betrayal." The chamber was in chaos, but Ilhan Omar sat motionless, her once bold demeanor shattered by the weight of Kennedy's relentless evidence. The Louisiana senator had turned the hearing into a tribunal for ethical justice, and he wasn't done. John Neely Kennedy reached for his final folder marked with Department of Defense seals and classifications that made security personnel shift nervously. Representative Omar Kennedy began his voice heavy with the authority of a senator defending the nation's trust. "Everything we've discussed, immigration fraud, financial corruption, foreign influence, was just preparation. Now we talk about your oath of office and the betrayal of the American people who trusted you." Kennedy held a worn copy of the Constitution. "Representative Omar, do you recall the oath you swore as a congresswoman?" Omar's voice was barely audible. "Yes, I took the standard oath." Standard Kennedy repeated his Louisiana drawl, making the word sacred. "Let me remind you. I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's a promise to the American people, not to foreign powers." He opened his folder displaying classified documents marked with House Intelligence Committee seals. As a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, you had access to sensitive national security information. Omar tried to muster dignity. "My service has always respected classified protocols." "Is that so?" Kennedy asked, his tone sharpening. "Because I have evidence you shared classified information with unauthorized foreign contacts. Monitors showed phone records of calls made after classified briefings to numbers linked to Qatari intelligence. These show you made 14 calls to foreign operatives within hours of briefings, Kennedy said with precision. But the concerning part is what you discussed. Transcripts revealed Omar sharing details of U.S. military positions, diplomatic strategies, and warnings about operations against Iranian proxies. Omar's panic surged. Those transcripts are fabricated. Surveillance of a congresswoman is illegal. When a congresswoman betrays her country, surveillance becomes evidence, Kennedy replied. He activated a video system. You've testified under oath about your activities. Let's see how that holds up. The screen split, showing Omar's sworn denials, alongside contradicting recordings of her coordinating with foreign agents. The side-by-side was devastating, lie after lie exposed. Perjury is a felony, Representative Omar Kennedy said. You've committed it at least 17 times. He displayed emails showing Omar using congressional resources to share legislative priorities with foreign officials, undermining U.S. interests. You turned your office into a foreign influence hub funded by taxpayers you betrayed. Kennedy's voice grew grave. What I'm about to present is classified at the highest levels, but Americans deserve to know. On a specific date, you attended a briefing on U.S. operations against Iranian nuclear facilities. Within hours, Qatari sources relayed those details to Iranian commanders. The timeline was damning, briefing Omar's call, then hostile forces acting on the information. You didn't just leak, you enabled enemies to counter American operations. Via secure video, a shadowed CIA officer testified. Omar's leaks compromised 12 operations, leading to the capture and likely execution of 3 U.S. assets. American blood is on your hands, Kennedy said, his voice heavy. You sold out those protecting our homeland. Kennedy held his Constitution and an American flag from fallen servicemen's families. You swore to defend the Constitution, but became the enemy the founders feared, a domestic threat serving foreign masters. You've taken their money, followed their orders, and leaked secrets that cost American lives. Federal marshals entered with arrest warrants. Ilhan Omar, you're under arrest for espionage and conspiracy, the lead marshal announced as Omar collapsed, paramedics rushing in. Kennedy addressed the chamber. This is ethical justice. No one is above the Constitution. The room erupted in applause, a testament to Kennedy's defense of American values. Lessons learned. This hearing teaches us that accountability is the bedrock of democracy. No official, no matter their position, is above the law. Loyalty to country must outweigh personal gain or foreign influence. Ethical leadership, as Kennedy showed, demands courage to confront betrayal. Citizens must stay vigilant, demanding transparency and integrity from leaders. Justice may be slow, but with principled leaders it prevails, ensuring the Constitution endures as our shield against those who undermine it.